Hey everyone, got a little change of scenery for you today. This is going to be a unstructured video. No real script here today, but I do want to talk about something that's been on my mind lately, which is data science interviews. Now, when you think about a data science interview, or any interview really, typically you're thinking about it as, I'm the candidate, I'm going to go meet somebody at the company, and they're going to evaluate me and my abilities. And this is definitely true to an extent, but I think there's a flip side to this that people don't think enough about, but you definitely should be thinking about this, I would argue even more so, which is that just as the company is trying to evaluate something about you, you should also be using the interview to evaluate the company. Now, this sounds a little weird, and it also sounds difficult. If you think about an interview, let's say it lasts 1 hour, typically 45 or 50 minutes of that hour are you getting asked questions by the interviewer. Explain this to me, code this, so-and-so. So it's only that last 10 or 15 minutes where you explicitly get to ask questions to the interviewer to get what I like to call explicit signals about the company. I call these explicit signals because it's explicitly you asking a question and hopefully getting a good response from the interviewer. Now, we'll talk at the end of this video about good questions to ask in that last 10 or 15 minutes. But because most of the interview, 45 or 50 minutes of an hour, are you getting asked questions, I think it's equally, or actually more important, for you to get really good at reading what I like to call implicit signals from the interviewer. And I call these implicit signals because they're not any information you gather from asking questions. Instead, it's information you're gathering in the background or in the context of the interview while it's happening. And this can be a difficult skill, but I think it's something that you can learn over time as you do more and more interviews. And it's also something that's extremely important to be able to gather, to know if this company that I'm interviewing at is somewhere I would even be happy working, where my skills will be valued, and if it's somewhere I want to spend the next near future of my life. And so let's talk about implicit signal number 1. And this one comes during the part of the interview where they ask you about more theoretical data science concepts. Explain this concept to me, or explain the math behind this, stuff like that. You know what, let's do it this way. Let me give you what I consider a bad set of questions that you might get during this section, and talk about why I think it's a completely insane set of questions that you could get asked. This would be a bad set of questions. Let's say the first question is, explain logistic regression to me. Let's say you answer that. The next question is, explain decision trees to me. You answer this one, and let's say the final question in this section is, explain PCA, or principal components analysis, to me. On the surface, these seem like great questions. I mean, each of them is geared towards some area of data science, and maybe you should need to know them for the job. Think about it one level deeper. And let me lead with this. Let me say that any data science job, no matter what field or technologies or tools you're using, all have this one thing in common, which is that data scientists are, at the end of the day, people who are solving complex problems. And solving a problem is inherently something that requires step-by-step thinking, kind of going from something abstract to getting something concrete at the end of the day. Think about this set of questions. Each of them individually may have something to do with the field of data science, but the key insight is that these questions have nothing to do with each other. They don't build on the last one. They don't tell you anything about the candidate's problem-solving ability. And so in the moment, I'm not saying you should cut the interview short and say, this is a bad set of questions. How dare you? I think you should answer these questions to the best of your ability. But after the interview, I do think it's worth critically thinking about, what did the interviewer actually learn about my problem-solving ability based on these questions? And the answer is probably nothing. These are questions that I'd probably get on the top Google search result for list of data science interview questions. It doesn't seem like there was a lot of thought put behind the sequence of questions. And so let me offer maybe an off-the-cuff response for a better sequence of questions that you might get during this part of the interview. The first question may still be, explain logistic regression to me at a high level, but the next question should build on that. It may be something like, explain the math behind logistic regression, explain the loss function, what is it trying to do, why does it work? So this is kind of getting into the mechanics of the algorithm. And maybe the final question is more geared towards, how do we actually translate this mathematical thing into some real-world decisions? So we might ask something like, how do we take the probabilities that come out of logistic regression and use that to make some kind of business decision? So do you see what I mean? Like, this sequence of questions is just infinitely better than the last sequence of questions because each one is building on the last one. You are evaluating the candidate's problem-solving ability. How do they think about these algorithms? How do they approach the relationship between the mathy side of data science and the more practical decision-making business side of data science? This is not things you're going to learn from that initial series of questions, and so that's why I consider this implicit signal number 1. Now let's talk about the other big implicit signal, which is something you would see during the coding section of the interview. So as you know, data scientists still do need to code, and so it's very likely you'll get a coding section of the interview, and they'll probably just ask you something like, here's a problem that I want solved, make your best attempt at coding up a solution to this problem. Now, even if you have prepared for these coding interviews beforehand, even if you've done tons of practice, it's normal for it to happen that you just get completely stuck at the beginning. Now, as counterintuitive as this might sound, while you're kind of sitting there stressed about how to solve this problem, the other thing you should be thinking about is how is the interviewer reacting to the situation of me being stuck? In my experience, it can go one of two ways. And here's the bad way, is that you get stuck, and I think the maximum time would be around 5 minutes before you make this call. The reason is because typically these coding exercises are 35, 45 minutes, so 5 minutes is a rather long time to get stuck. If the interviewer has not said a word, has not stepped in, has not done anything in 5 minutes, or even worse, if you've asked them for help and they've explicitly said, no, I'm not going to help you, I think that is a bad outcome, and that's an implicit signal that maybe I don't want to work at this place, and let me tell you why. In any real data science job, you're not going to be working alone, hopefully. You will have a team that's going to be working with you. They'll be helping you with stuff. You'll be helping them with stuff. And so we know that this role should be team-based, should be interactive. Now, of course, the interviewer should give you some time to think about this problem. That is normal and expected, and people need time to think through solutions. But at the same time, they should step in and offer that little bit of help that you would get in the role anyways, to kind of get you unstuck from the situation. I think that if they're just willing to let you be stuck for a long amount of time and risk not learning about what you could code up if you did get past this one particular hurdle, that doesn't send very good signals to me. So I do think that the other implicit signal to watch out for is that if you get completely stuck during the coding part of the problem, do they step in, give you a gentle nudge in the right direction, get the ball rolling, and help you kind of solve the problem? Or does it seem like you're against the interviewer, where it's like you versus me? You never want the interview to feel like too much of a you versus me situation. I think it's better if it feels kind of like, here's a challenge that I'm proposing you, take your best attempt at it, but I will help you get the ball rolling if things aren't going well. So that is the other implicit signal to watch out for. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, let's talk about the best way to gather explicit signals at the end of the interview. So at the end of the interview, they'll give you 10 or 15 minutes, hey, do you have any questions for me, sort of thing. This is an extremely personal decision. It depends on what you want out of this job. For example, let me just give you a couple examples. If you're somebody who really values teamwork, let's say that you would not thrive in a setting where it's mostly individual work, ask that question. And what I like to do also is ask it in a way that makes the person think about where the deficiencies might be in that metric. For example, instead of asking, is the company collaborative? You might ask, what are the biggest challenges in collaboration between people at the company? And that kind of gives you a better lens into where the deficiencies might be and how they're going about addressing it. So that's just one thing. Maybe instead of collaboration, you are more of an individual person where you care about having enough time to kind of heads down, do your work, and kind of code up a really cool solution to a problem. Then go ahead and ask that question instead. You might ask something like, how do you ensure that people have time to get heads down work done, or have time to think about problems deeply on their own if needed? So whatever the thing is that you care about, ask that question instead of asking some canned question you found on Google that you think is going to impress the interviewer. Definitely use those 2 or 3 or 4 questions, a small amount of explicit signals you can gather, to understand things that you personally care about, not what somebody else cares about. And so that, I think, should wrap up the video. Again, super unstructured, so I hope the points I made were reasonably clear. But the main point that I wanted to make is just that an interview goes both ways. The way we typically think about it is the company interviewing you, judging something about you, but it should be even more so about what am I learning about this company through the interview? And part of that is implicitly and part of that is explicitly, but at the end of the day, after your interview, you should take some time and reflect on, is this a place I would want to work based on these signals that I've gathered? And hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So Anyways, if you like this format, please let me know. If you hate this format, please let me know. And like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.